Hey kids, we're back with our Little Pilgrims Progress. And last time we saw little Christian, he was getting challenged by ins and some of the other little boys. And so him and Hopeful were deciding to journey on or what they were going to do there. So let's pick up here in chapter 30. Dimas and the silver mine. Buy-ins and his schoolfellows walked on together, laughing and talking. Christian and Hopeful were not far from them, and presently the four boys ran after them and began to ask them foolish questions. They pretended that they wished to know whether some of the things that they were fond of doing were wrong and likely to displease the king. And they hoped that Christian would be brave enough to answer them truly, because then they would be able to call him a coward. But although little Christian was shy and timid child, he was not afraid to speak the truth. He had learned to love the king dearly and no fear of what these rough boys might do to him. Would have made him agree with Buy-ins and his friends. He answered all their questions bravely and truly, and at last they began to feel ashamed of themselves and said no more. Christian was very glad when they left him, and he went on with Hopeful while Buy-ins stayed behind with his three idle companions. Very soon the little pilgrim came to a narrow plain, where the pathway was smooth and easy, and just beyond it he saw a hill with an opening in the side, like the mouth of a cave, and a lad was standing upon the hill, and when Christian and Hopeful passed by, he called to them, saying, "Come up here, I will show you something." "What is it?" said Christian. "A silver mine," said the lad, "and it is full of rich treasure, and you can gather up enough to take with you on your journey." "Oh," cried Hopeful, "let us go and look at it." But Christian pulled him back, saying, "No, no," he said, "it is not a safe place." Then he called to the lad, whose name was Dimas, and asked if it were not dangerous. Dimas knew quite well that it was very dangerous indeed, but he was a servant of the wicked prince to whom the mine belonged, and he had been sent there on purpose to tempt the pilgrims by telling them of its rich store of silver. So he answered, "It is safe unless you are very careless." But Christian turned away, saying to Hopeful, "We will not go. I am sure I have heard about it, and you will and you see we would not reach it without leaving the way of the king." Then Dimas cried, "If you will not come, you might at least wait for me, and I will go with you. I am a pilgrim too." "I don't think you are one of the king's pilgrims," replied Christian, "or you would not try to hinder us on our journey. We cannot wait for anybody." So Dimas said no more, but watched for Buy-ins and the other boys who were not far off. Hopeful turned around to see what they would do. They did not love the king, and they did not care about the celestial city to which they pretended they were going. So when they heard of the hidden treasure in the hillside, they hurried eagerly to the mouth of the cave. Dimas knew that people who went into it to dig for silver were nearly always either lost or killed there. But he told Buy-ins and his friends that it was quite safe, and they were ready to believe anything that he said. Little Christian and Hopeful saw them enter the cave, but no one ever heard anything of them again. No doubt they ventured too far into the dark and winding passage and were never able to find their way back into the daylight. When the pilgrims had walked for some distance beyond the hill, Hopeful stopped suddenly and said, "Oh, what can that be?" Christian looked where he was pointing and saw a strange white figure standing by the roadside. As they came near, the boys saw that it did not move, but it was the shape of a woman, and her face turned away from the celestial city. "Do you think she was a pilgrim?" whispered Hopeful. "I don't know," said Christian. "It looks like a statue. I wonder why it is placed there by the wayside." They looked around it and looked at it carefully. At last, Hopeful saw a few words carved upon the border of the woman's veil, just where it lay upon her forehead. They were old and worn, and he could not make them out. But after puzzling over them a little, Christian read, "Remember Lot's wife." "I know what it is now," he said. "I read about it at the library at the Palace Beautiful." Then he told Hopeful how the king had once rescued a man named Lot, with his wife and two daughters, from a city that was being destroyed for its wickedness. He sent an angel to bring them out, and the angel told them not to look back. But Lot's wife did look back, and the moment she turned, her body grew quite stiff, and she became a pillar of salt, so that she could never move again. "What a dreadful thing," said Hopeful. Is it put here to frighten us? Not to frighten us, I think, but it is to make us careful. I am very glad we did not go up the hill when Dimas called. So am I, for I should not like the king to punish me. Chapter 32. The Valley of Peace. The boys were obliged to travel very slowly that day, day on account of Christian's weakness. Where shall we sleep? Said Hopeful. You cannot walk all night, and it is not safe to lie down by the wayside. Perhaps there is another house like the Palace Beautiful, replied Christian. I was very happy there. You cannot think how kind Discretion and her daughters were to me. Then Hopeful began to ask questions about them, and Christian tried to tell them of all he had seen and heard at the palace. But the little pilgrim's strength was failing after the day's journey. He soon became too tired to speak and could scarcely walk, even with the help of Hopeful's arm. Hopeful was kind and gentle and did all he could to cheer his weary little companion. But he began to feel very anxious when he saw that Christian's face was growing paler and paler every minute. If we could only find a place to rest in, he thought, and as the evening shadows closed round the pathway, he strained his eyes eagerly in hope of seeing some distant light, which would tell him they were coming near to a house where they might stay until morning. But no light appeared, and presently the night came on, and still the little pilgrims crept slowly along, for Christian would not be persuaded to lie down upon the grass, although Hopeful promised to watch carefully by his side. We will go on, he said. I don't think the king will forget us. He knows how tired we are, and he will be sure to give us rest soon. And now the stars began to twinkle in the dark sky, and the moon rose over the hills and shed her pure soft light upon the way of the king. As Hopeful looked forward, he saw that the path was widening and that a broad river was flowing in the distance. We are coming to the beautiful country, he exclaimed. Look, Christian, the river is close to the wayside, and the path must lead through that meadow, which is all fenced in and safe. Christian looked, and the sight of the river and the hope of resting revived him a little. In a short time they reached the brink of the water and found that Hopeful was right. The way of the king ran close to the river, which is called the River of Life, and the ground on both sides of it were protected by strong fences, forming a beautiful meadow covered in soft grass and flowers and shaded by tall, spreading trees, under whose boughs the king's pilgrims might rest safely and have no fear of enemies. How thankful Christian was to lay his aching little body upon a mossy bank. Hopeful sat by him and watched the moonlight playing peacefully upon the rippling water. Soon he clasped Christian's hand, saying, The wicked prince never comes here. Oh, no, said Christian, I'm sure he does not. It is all so still and happy. The little pilgrim lay side by side and slept quietly until morning. When the sun arose, the messenger came to them from the king. This is the Valley of Peace, he said. You are to stay here for a few days until Christian grows strong again. You will find plenty of food, for the trees are full of fruit, and you must drink the water of the river, which will strengthen and refresh you. So the boys spent a whole week in the beautiful valley, resting and enjoying their life more and more every day. Christian was not afraid to loosen his armor in this quiet spot, and he would sit by the river, leaning comfortably against the trunk of some wide-spreading tree, while Hopeful lay on the grass near him, plucking the flowers or gathering up the delicious fruit, which is now ripe and falling from the heavily laden boughs. After all Christian's troubles, the Valley of Peace seemed very pleasant. Soon the color came back into his cheeks and the strength in his limbs, and he felt able to continue his journey. I don't think we are very far from the celestial city, he said, and I shall be so glad when we get there. After this good rest, we shall be able to travel faster. Chapter 33, By Paths Meadow. The little pilgrims left the Valley of Peace early in the morning and traveled along the way of the king all that day. Late in the afternoon, they came to a place where a stile led into a broad green meadow. It was called By Paths Meadow, and it belonged to a cruel and powerful giant named Despair. He was one of the most famous soldiers in the wicked prince's armies, and he lived in a strong castle beyond the meadow, which could not be seen from the way of the king. This was all written in Christian's book, but he did not think of looking at it just then. The boys were both feeling very tired. They had found the path leading them from the rivers, rough and stony, and their feet were sore and aching. Christian stopped when he saw the stile and leaned over it, a fence dividing the meadow from the way of the king, but a smooth grassy path ran close to it. "Could we not walk along this path for a while?" he said, turning to Hopeful. "The stones are so hard and my feet ache dreadfully." "So do mine," answered Hopeful, "but would it be safe?" Then they came to the stile also and looked over. "Oh, I think it must be," said Christian. "See, it runs close to the fence. We would climb back again anywhere in a minute." Hopeful did not feel quite sure that they were doing right, but as he thought that Christian knew more about the king's law than he did, he followed his companion into the meadow. The grass was soft and pleasant on their feet, and not far before them another boy was walking along near the fence. Christian called to him, saying, "Can you tell us where this path leads to?" The boys, whose name was Vain Confidence, turned round and replied, "To the celestial city." "You see," said Christian, "I was right. We shall be quite safe. We can keep behind the boy, and then if there's any danger, we shall know of it in time to escape." But Hopeful was not satisfied, and when the night came on, the shadows grew thick that the figure of Vain Confidence could no longer be seen. He felt frightened. Suddenly a cry was heard and a sound of falling. Hopeful seized Christian's arm and clung to him in great fear. And Christian, too, lost his courage and began to tremble from head to foot. "What could have happened?" he said, and he answered again to Vain Confidence. But he received no answer. Only through the darkness the boys could hear that someone was groaning in terrible pain. "I am sure we are not in the right way," said Hopeful, "and it is so dark." Christian did not answer. He knew that he had done wrong in climbing over the stile, and he wondered how he could have been so foolish as to think that any path could be safe that led him out of the straight road. But before he could speak again, he felt some heavy drops of rain upon his face. Then a bright flash of lightning darted across the sky, and a roar of thunder followed. The rain poured in torrents, and the thunder and the lightning were more fearful than any which they had heard or seen before. Christian began to cry and to wish that he had not been so careless. "It was my fault," he said. "Oh, Hopeful, I am sorry. I deserve to be killed. But you would never have come if I had not persuaded you." "I might have," said Hopeful, not liking to hear poor Christian's sobs. "Don't cry, Christian. It is my fault too, because I did not try to prevent your coming." "Let us turn back," said Christian. "Perhaps we can find our way." By this time the heavy rain was filling the little streams that ran through the meadow, and the path by the fence was flooded. The water was so deep that the boys could scarcely keep their footing, and they began to fear that they would never get back to the way of the king. The storm lasted for many hours, although Christian and Hopeful struggled on bravely, and they soon found that it would not be possible to make their way to the stile in the darkness. So at last they crouched down together in a little sheltered corner close to the fence, meaning to watch for the first gleam of daylight and then to hasten on their way. They were both worn out with fright and weariness, and before the morning came, they fell asleep. So as you see, taking an easy path is not always a good thing. Christian and Hopeful went off on another path, and it didn't prove to be a good path. And so they're trying to get back on the way of the king. So we'll see next time in our chapters what's going to happen. Can they find the way of the king again? Can they get back on the right path? So I hope you'll join me as we continue on in Little Pilgrims Progress. Have a great day.